We're already proving with archaeological evidence that everything that was written about this temple was wrong. She was a mother, she was a wife, she was a queen, she was a goddess. And we are trying to find out what it led us.
There are discoveries that confirm what we thought we knew, and there are discoveries that unmake what we were certain of. The first category is satisfying. The second is something else entirely. A confrontation with the gap between the stories we tell about the past and the reality that the past actually contained, a reality that has been sitting in the ground, patient and indifferent, waiting for the tools and the persistence and the specific combination of scientific intuition and physical luck that finally reaches it. The search for Cleopatra's tomb has been one of archaeology's most sustained and most publicly discussed pursuits for generations, generating dozens of expeditions, hundreds of theories, and a steady accumulation of near misses and promising leads that ultimately dissolved into uncertainty. But the excavation work that has been developing at Taposiris Magna, a temple complex situated approximately 45 kilometers west of Alexandria along Egypt's Mediterranean coast, has been producing findings that are genuinely changing the framework of what is considered possible in this search, and the most recent phase of that work, involving a tunnel discovery that has prompted descriptions from the engineers who examined it as among the most extraordinary feats of ancient construction ever documented, has shifted the conversation from speculation to something that demands considerably more serious attention. Cleopatra VII Philopator, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, the woman who governed one of the ancient world's most powerful states through a combination of political intelligence, multilingual diplomacy, and the cultivation of alliances with the two most powerful Romans of her era, died in August of 30 BCE, 3 weeks after the death of Mark Antony and in the immediate aftermath of Octavian's conquest of Alexandria. The Roman sources that constitute the primary written record of her death describe a suicide, most famously attributed to the bite of an asp, though ancient accounts disagree on the method and modern toxicologists have raised questions about whether the traditional narrative is medically plausible. What the ancient sources agree on is that she was buried with appropriate royal ceremony, that Octavian, who had reasons both political and personal to ensure her burial was handled with a degree of dignity, permitted this, and that her tomb was located in the same general area as that of Mark Antony. Beyond these broad outlines, the written record falls silent. No ancient source provides coordinates. No map survives. The tomb of the most famous woman ruler in ancient history has been, for more than 2,000 years, effectively lost. The archaeology of Alexandria itself presents challenges that are unusual even by the standards of ancient site investigation. The modern city has been continuously inhabited since its foundation by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, which means that the ancient city's remains lie beneath layers of subsequent construction, much of it inaccessible without demolishing existing structures that are themselves historically and practically significant. The ancient harbor area, which would have contained many of the royal quarter's most important buildings, has been submerged by the gradual subsidence of the Nile Delta coastline, an ongoing geological process that has lowered the level of the ancient ground surface relative to the sea, dropping substantial sections of the Ptolemaic city beneath the water of the eastern harbor. Underwater archaeological work in the harbor, most extensively conducted by the European Institute for Underwater Archaeology under Frank Gaudio, has recovered extraordinary quantities of material. Statues, architectural fragments, inscriptions, that confirm the general location of the ancient royal quarter but have not yet produced a structure that can be identified as a tomb complex. The shift in investigative focus toward Taposiris Magna reflects a theoretical framework developed most extensively by Dr. Kathleen Martinez, a Dominican archaeologist who has been excavating at the site under permits from Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities for nearly 2 decades. Martinez's argument, which she has presented in academic contexts and which has attracted both serious engagement and serious skepticism from Egyptological specialists, centers on the religious and symbolic logic of Cleopatra's self-presentation. Cleopatra VII was the first ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty to learn the Egyptian language, and she presented herself consistently to the Egyptian priestly establishment as the earthly embodiment of Isis, the goddess whose mythology centered on the resurrection of her murdered husband Osiris, the god of the dead and the afterlife, through her devoted retrieval and reconstitution of his dismembered body. For a ruler who had invested so significantly in this identification, and who died following the death of the man most closely associated with her politically and personally, the symbolic logic of burial near a major temple dedicated to Osiris, the god whose resurrection Isis accomplished, the divine archetype of the dead king brought back to life, would have been extraordinarily compelling. Taposiris Magna contains exactly such a temple, one with documented Ptolemaic royal connections and a history of use that aligns with the period of Cleopatra's reign. The excavations that Martinez and her team have been conducting at Taposiris Magna over the years have produced a consistent stream of findings that individually might be explained in various ways, but that collectively build a picture of a site with unusual royal significance during the 1st century BCE. Coins bearing Cleopatra's image have been recovered in quantities and contexts that suggest more than routine commercial circulation. Statues with iconographic attributes connecting them to royal Ptolemaic patronage have emerged from the debris of the temple's outer enclosure. Burial shafts discovered within the temple complex have contained mummies of individuals whose wrapping and preparation suggest elevated social status, people connected to a royal or priestly establishment rather than ordinary community burials. The presence of these finds within a temple complex dedicated to Osiris and Isis, at a site with documented Ptolemaic royal associations, at a location that Martinez argues is consistent with ancient references to Cleopatra's burial, has sustained the excavation's momentum even as the tomb itself has remained elusive. The tunnel discovery that has generated the most recent surge of attention was described in reports from the ongoing excavation as an engineering achievement whose characteristics genuinely challenged the expectations of the structural engineers who analyzed it. The tunnel, cut through solid limestone bedrock at a depth that places it well below the foundation level of the temple structure above, extends for a distance that Egyptian antiquities officials have reported as exceeding a kilometer in length. What has made it exceptional in the eyes of the specialists who examined it is the precision of its construction. The tunnel maintains a consistent level across its entire documented length, a feat that requires sophisticated surveying knowledge and execution capability to achieve in any material, and that is particularly impressive when the medium is solid rock cut by hand tools. The walls and ceiling of the passage, as revealed by camera systems lowered through bore holes drilled to access it, are smooth and regular in a way that has prompted comparisons to the most technically accomplished subterranean construction known from the ancient world. Its current condition, despite more than 2,000 years of geological pressure and groundwater activity, appears remarkably intact. The deeper significance of the tunnel's architecture lies in its potential function. Monumental underground passages in ancient Egyptian religious architecture were not simple functional corridors. They carried layered symbolic meaning connected to the passage of the soul through the underworld, the journey of the dead from the realm of the living through the darkness of the Duat, the Egyptian afterlife realm, toward the transformative presence of Osiris and the possibility of resurrection. The Book of the Dead, the collection of spells and instructions that guided the deceased through the afterlife's challenges, describes corridors, gates, and chambers that the soul must navigate with appropriate ritual knowledge. Physical tunnels built as part of royal mortuary complexes replicated this symbolic geography in stone, allowing the entombed person's remains to exist within an architecture that mirrored the cosmological journey their soul was understood to be taking. A tunnel of the scale and construction quality identified at Taposiris Magna would be consistent with the provision of exactly this kind of symbolic infrastructure for someone whose burial was expected to be permanent, prestigious, and theologically significant. The artifacts recovered from the accessible portions of the site during recent excavation seasons have reinforced the picture of a location with direct royal connections to the late Ptolemaic period. Inscriptional material in both Greek and Egyptian hieroglyphic script, a bilingual quality that would be consistent with Cleopatra's dual identity as both Greek-speaking Ptolemaic monarch and self-presented embodiment of Egyptian religious tradition, has been documented from the temple walls and from detached architectural fragments found within the enclosure. The presence of materials associated with royal embalming and mortuary ritual, detected through chemical analysis of residues found in specific contexts within the excavation, has added forensic weight to arguments about the site's function. The combination of inscriptional, artifactual, and chemical evidence does not in itself confirm the presence of Cleopatra's burial, but it establishes a pattern of royal mortuary activity at the site that warrants the continued and intensive investigation that Martinez and her team have been conducting. The broader context of Cleopatra's historical significance gives the search for her tomb a weight that extends well beyond the professional concerns of Egyptology. She was, at the height of her power, arguably the wealthiest individual in the Mediterranean world. Her kingdom controlled the grain production that fed Rome, the luxury goods trade routes that connected the Mediterranean to Arabia and India, and the accumulated intellectual resources of the Library of Alexandria and the Mouseion, the research institution associated with it. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were not simply romantic attachments, but carefully managed political alliances through which she attempted to preserve Egyptian sovereignty against Roman absorption. Her death in 30 BCE ended not only her own reign but the last independent Ptolemaic government, incorporating Egypt definitively into the Roman imperial system as a province of extraordinary economic importance. The tomb of such a person, if found intact or even substantially intact, would represent a historical document of extraordinary richness, not simply in terms of the objects it might contain, but in terms of what those objects would reveal about the art, the religious practice, the technology, and the political self-presentation of the final era of independent Egyptian civilization. The challenges facing any attempt to locate and excavate such a tomb remain substantial, and the specialists who have examined the Taposiris Magna evidence are appropriately careful about the gap between promising findings and confirmed identification. The site has been subject to disturbance across multiple historical periods. Roman construction activity, medieval quarrying, and centuries of agricultural use have all affected the surface layers and potentially the subsurface archaeology as well. The groundwater table in the region, influenced by the proximity of Lake Mariaut and the Mediterranean, creates conditions that affect the preservation of organic materials and the accessibility of deep excavation contexts. The sheer scale of the Taposiris Magna complex means that systematic investigation will require years of additional work even under optimal conditions. And the possibility that the royal burials associated with the late Ptolemaic period were located not here but in Alexandria itself, now buried under a modern city of approximately 5 million people, remains impossible to definitively exclude. What the evidence from the ongoing excavation has established, however, is that Taposiris Magna is not simply one candidate among many equally plausible alternatives. The accumulated findings, the coinage, the statuary, the inscriptional material, the mortuary residues, the subterranean tunnel of exceptional construction quality, form a pattern that is consistent with the site's use as a significant royal mortuary location during exactly the period when Cleopatra's burial would have been arranged. Martinez has described the tunnel specifically as pointing toward a sealed chamber whose characteristics, visible in the remote sensing data, include dimensions and internal conditions consistent with an intact and deliberately sealed burial space. The process of accessing that chamber safely, without damaging its contents or structure, is itself a substantial archaeological and engineering undertaking that requires the careful sequencing that responsible excavation practice demands. The story of Cleopatra's lost tomb is, in one sense, a story about the limits of the historical record, about the fact that the ancient sources we depend on for knowledge of the past were written by people with their own interests and limitations, and that what they chose not to record, or chose to record only obliquely, can be as significant as what they preserved. Octavian, who became Augustus and transformed Rome from republic to empire, had reasons to minimize detailed documentation of Cleopatra's burial. Her tomb, if known and accessible, would have served as a focus for Egyptian loyalty and potentially for ongoing political resistance to Roman rule. That the location of her tomb was not preserved in any surviving source may reflect not carelessness but deliberate policy. An erasure as politically motivated as any of the other erasures that Roman historiography performed on the memory of people whose existence complicated the official narrative. Finding the tomb would mean recovering something that was, perhaps, intentionally lost. The excavation at Taposiris Magna continues, and each season adds to the body of evidence that makes the site's connection to Royal Ptolemaic mortuary activity clearer, while the central question, whether the specific person of Cleopatra VII lies somewhere within or beneath it, remains open. The tunnel is being documented with the systematic thoroughness that a discovery of its scale demands. The chamber identified in the remote sensing data awaits the careful physical approach that will determine what it contains. The team working the site understands both what is at stake historically and what the responsible pace of investigation requires. For those following from outside, the combination of extraordinary physical evidence and still unresolved central mystery is exactly what makes this particular archaeological pursuit one of the most compelling ongoing investigations in the field. The desert west of Alexandria has kept its secret for more than 2 millennia. How much longer it can do so is a question that the people currently working the ground believe they are closer to answering than anyone has ever been.